Okay, I think in the interest of time, I just saw a message from Temitope that he's running behind. He will be joining, and the other speaker also is trying to join. But in the interest of time, I think we should kick off. Can you hear me properly?
Yes.
And can you see my screen?
Yes.
Dennis, sorry, Eugene, can you hear me properly?
That's better.
Okay.
Yeah, so we can hear. So I think let's just kick off, and then the rest of the two speakers will join. I think they are running late, but I just saw the message, so they're joining along the way. So thank you so much for joining us, and everybody on the line. We have a few people I can see they are joining in. Today, for our discussion, is mainly focused on leadership in a crisis, looking at perspective, mindset, and behavior. Of course, taking into the consideration of current COVID-19 crisis and how the situation has been. And we hope to learn from our speaker how some of the responses and best practice that has helped to reshape and help best leader to navigate the current situation. So before we start, my name is Eugene. I'm the co-founder and the CEO for SSG Consulting, and I'm also the chair for One Africa Network, and I'm also the chair for African Business Chamber in the UK. And I'll be supported by my partner who's ordering now, Dennis Aguma, who's also a partner at SSG and a co-chair One Africa and a lecturer at Birmingham City University. Before we kick off, we'll be taking a question at the end of the discussion, and we'll be muting everyone just to minimize the discussion. So just to introduce you a bit about One Africa Network, for those who are new, One Africa Network is a social development organization mainly focused on the issue that affect Black and African businesses, entrepreneurs, and professionals within the UK economy. And we are committed to advancing entrepreneurship, innovation, excellence, inclusiveness, and sustainable economic growth. So over the crisis, of course, we've been lucky to be supported by Innovate UK to support the BME community, mainly the Black and African community who've been affected by the crisis, to help them navigate the current situation for professionals and to realign themselves, and also for the business to reposition their model, to look at their operational structure, their supply chain, and the cash flow and costing and the product to prepare themselves and for the recovery and the new norm. So we do a lot of work in terms of research. We are collaborating with various organizations, advocacy, consulting, and capacity development, and focusing mainly on many various industries and a couple of areas, mainly policies that affect our members in the society, looking at economic issues, business growth, activities, innovation, technology, and looking at the participation of our member within the STEM industry, creativity, and culture. So part of the culture, we are currently working collaboratively with the Commonwealth Game 22 to make sure that we engage more minorities and the BME within the community. Can you hear me? Hello?
We can hear you.
I can hear you.
Yeah. So we engage our members in various ways, including discussion and networking and other activities, including business discussion. And we hope to starting delivering an award for excellence and the other business growth, such as masterclass and mentoring. So if anybody on the line is interested to join for mentoring, my colleague will share detail in terms of how you can sign up. So we are currently supporting people affected through various mentoring activities, and coupling with our discussion, we're also doing masterclass which can be found on our website or on Eventbrite. So these are some of we have been fortunate to welcome many speakers. These are some of the speakers we've welcomed who participated in our program, sharing their perspective and the thoughts and some practical insights in how our members can improve themselves and navigate the situation. And these are some of we've hosted various networking activities before COVID-19, and we hope to continue our work after the lockdown. And these are some of the networking events also we hosted to encourage our members to connect, collaborate, share ideas, insights, and the perspective that can help them grow and thrive in the society. So for today's discussion, we're going to focus mainly on leadership in the crisis, so perspective, mindset, and behavior. And we'll be looking at various topical issues, looking some of the response as a result of COVID-19 outbreak and the future challenges, creating emergency leaders. As you know, every crisis, there's always new leaders emerging, and some leaders also are challenged and questioned in terms of their practices. And you continue to see various decision making at various times and with uncertainty. And of course, through crisis, effective communication is always a key thing. And also part of the strategic planning is always looking at the short term, near term, and everyone would appreciate the situation, how it has been changing on a daily basis. And so it's good always to look at short term and long term. So to break down some of this discussion and to learn how these people have been responding, today I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Winston. Unfortunately, he's running late, but he should be joining at any time. And secondly, we have Morenike. I hope I spelled it right. Who's a commercial and financial director at the London Pension Funds Authority. Thirdly, I have Frances-Yvonne Igweh. She's a partner and head of Africa practice at the Spencer West. And finally, we got Temitope Olodo, who's the CEO for TRAZ Consortium. Unfortunately, he also is running late, but hopefully he will join us in the next few minutes. He was on traffic. So without wasting time, probably I'll welcome to the stage Morenike to introduce herself and probably help us to answer the first question in terms of how the crisis has impacted the business as usual, life as usual, and some of the best practice she's been adopting to navigate the current situation. Welcome, Morenike.
Thank you so much, Eugene. Thank you so much. It's such a privilege to be here this evening. Good evening, everyone. Yes, I'm Morenike Ajayi, and Eugene has already introduced me. During the day, I work as an accountant. I'm the commercial and finance director for a pension fund, and the largest one in London. And my giving back to my community, I run a social enterprise called Career Nuggets, and that's where it's just a support hub to help people on their career journey. And we use different outlets. We have a TV show. So we were on today at 5 o'clock. We're on 4 times a week. So we do everything. We run events, we provide mentoring. So there are different things we do. So Eugene has asked me to talk about, the topic, leadership in crisis, the perspective, mindset, and behavior. And that's where I want to take my cue from. We all know the current situation we're in now is a crisis. It's unexpected, it's unprecedented. We didn't expect anything like it. And yes, it might appear, I hope you can hear me because my internet seems to be funny.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, thank you. So they've eased the lockdown a bit, but we're still navigating through this crucial period. And I'm going to 3 angles that you have given to us, which is perspective, mindset, and behavior. So let's look at perspective. Perspective is how you see things. It's your viewpoint on things. And people view things in different manners. The mindset is what you choose to believe. It's what you set your mind on. And really, there can be one mindset. That's one that you want to. And from the state of mind, your mindset, that would then determine. So your behavior is how you.
Morenike, unfortunately, we lost you. Can you ask? Unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, okay. All right, so I was just talking about, the three angles that I'm going to take to talk about the current situation. So in terms of the perspective, from my perspective, I think people can look at this and think, it's a danger, it's a challenging time, it can be difficult. So that's a perspective. For some other people, they might see it as an opportune time, a time of flourishing, a time of seizing the moment. And for some people, they just sit on the fence and be indifferent about it, like there's nothing happening. Now, in terms of a mindset, I would say it's better to be able to navigate this current period, to have a positive mindset, to see this time as an opportune time. I know that there are loads of things that are happening. There are some companies that, because of what's happened, they probably folded up or relocated somewhere else, or they have had to lay off staff, shrink what they do. They've had to, change, it's affected people in different ways. But at the same time, it's been an opportune time for loads of people that we probably don't know about. Somebody was telling me a story of someone who, during this period, made £300,000 just by producing their own sanitizer. And there's so many other opportunities that we've seen how Amazon, over March and April, they grew by 300%. I mean, Laithwaite wine also grew. So there's so much opportunities out there. And in terms of having a mindset, it's better to have a mindset that is seeing the opportunities. And a lady called Martha Beck, she actually said something about in any deep crisis, there's an opportunity to make your life extraordinary in some way. And that's the sort of mindset I've chosen to have with everything going on, is to have a very positive mindset to be able to navigate the current crisis. And I think the last one is around the behavior that one needs to adopt to be able to get through this period. And as leaders, and things that I've taken on is be willing to embrace the change. So one of the presidents, Harry Truman, he actually said, men make history and not the other way around. So we make the history. In periods where there's no leadership, society stands still, progress occurs when courageous, skillful leaders seize the opportunity to change things for the better. So as leaders, we've got to see it as an opportunity and see that a time of change, a time of crisis, there is an underlying opportunity underneath it, and try to be proactive to find that. Yes, especially in this particular situation, a lot of us have had to react to it, but we shouldn't just sit on that. We have to think ahead and think about how we can get ahead of that curve. So we've seen how this was just sprung on us. We mustn't wait until another crisis comes and react. We have to put the right plan in place to be able to, so we need to be proactive, because when we talk about crisis, when we talk about things like this, it's a form of change, and change happens all the time. This COVID-19 situation is a form of change, but there's been changes before then. We can remember when we had the financial crisis. There's always going to be something that's going to happen. So I think as leaders, we just have to be proactive and put the right plans in place. So what I would say is, at a time like this, there are some actions. Go back home and intentionally reflect on what perspective you see. Is it a pessimistic one? Is it a status quo just being indifferent? Or is it an optimistic one? That's a question that you need to reflect on. And when you've done that, then ask yourself, which mindset do you have? What mindset have you subscribed to? And if necessary, you might consider changing that mindset. And then finally, just write yourself a plan. You will need to just write yourself a plan in terms of you need to take if you need to adjust your mindset. How are you going to really navigate that future? And I'm just going to hang it there so that and other speakers can pick it up from there. I hope that kind of answered your question in a way.
Yeah. Thank you, Morenike. And of course, I do see one of the things I picked up from your discussion, of course, is to see a crisis as an opportunity. And if you look at, especially like FTSE 100, 50% of the company on FTSE 100 were launched during a crisis. And of course, and looking at the current situation, we've seen quite a lot of businesses like not just Amazon, like Zoom itself. The share price just shot from, I think, 2 billion to 40 billion within 2-3 months. And beyond that, there's quite a lot of other companies that has grown. But of course, there's also casualties that, like manufacturing, automotive, and all those that has been on standstill. And also, there's those one also took the wrong decision, like Primark is a good example that they failed to prepare ahead and without, because poor decision making, they failed to adopt the technology and they have not been able to make any sale over the period because they realized they didn't have the right business model. Of course, I'll come back to you, but let me go to the next speaker. And of course, I'm delighted to welcome Temitope on the line, and also we go Dr. Winston. Winston, can you hear us? And Temitope? I think you're mute. You can. Dr. Winston, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, welcome. Winston, can you hear us? I think he's still trying to connect, but we'll come back to him later. So if I go to our next speaker, Frances, also welcome, Frances. And if you can also introduce yourself and give a brief in terms of how the situation has disrupted work or business as usual, and probably help to shed some light in terms of your view in terms of leadership in crisis, on perspective and mindset and behavior. And if you do agree with some of the things Morenike has highlighted, if you have any, if you share the same perspective or you have something else to add on.
Of course, thank you very much. It's such a pleasure to be here. And it's amazing that in times like this, you find that a network of like-minded individuals sort of builds up and springs up to support each other. In terms of background, so I'm Frances-Yvonne Igweh. I'm the partner and head of Africa practice at Spencer West, which is a leading law firm in the city. And my background started out at the bar, 3 Berlin buildings, Essex Court Chambers, and then went into the city, worked with leading law firms, Clyde & Co, Barlow, Gilbert, and then moved really sort of firmly into Africa-focused international work. So work on high-value matters that cuts across investment opportunities, projects, renewable energy, oil and gas, and looking at international trade matters as well. And in this period of COVID, one has really sort of seen an amazing sort of renaissance, and especially from the African perspective, where we are really looking inward, looking at the continent and recognizing that in times of crisis, how are we able to sort of sustain ourselves? Because ordinarily, you'd find that, you know, most African countries in times of crisis, the world is set up in such a way that one would have to sort of go to the West, right, for normal sort of aid or whatnot. But then in times such as this, the whole sort of global economy shut down, and you realize that every country is looking at itself, you know, having to shut borders, having to sort of pull resources and look at what they can do to fight this pandemic. And that sort of trickles down to leadership within the community, because leadership is not reserved to governments alone, as we know. Leadership is really sort of open to everyone that's within the world. So across the board in terms of business, professions, down to families, it's all about opportunities in which one can take a leadership position. And, you know, you find with this pandemic and with all the measures that have been taking place, that the lockdown has immensely affected individuals. There are some, you know, heroes out of this. Yes, we've mentioned all the big global players, but there are also sort of real heroes at the local level. When you look across the continent, you find individuals who literally sort of decided to sort of work on making masks, you know, decided to be innovative. They decided to sort of make their own hand gel. And that at a local level is a triumph, because you're seeing individuals thinking outside of the box. And granted that we've got really awful cases where some businesses have had to shut down, but in that same vein, you see others that are standing up in times of crisis. And it's all in the attitude. It's all in the mind. It's all in one's purpose. In times of crisis, you either find a sink or swim mentality. So either you sink, you know, and focus on the negative aspects and all the sort of stuff that one hears on the news and literally get into a mindset of fear, or you look at a mindset of succeeding. How can I navigate this? How can I still, you know, survive this? And that comes down to, as I mentioned, one's attitude, one's mindset. So when it comes down to business, looking at ways in which you can re-evaluate how you offer your business. So immediately looking at going online, for example, for those who can, looking at cutting down on risk matters. So if it's to do with employees, yes, one has to undergo the furlough scheme that has occurred, but you can also look at ways of cutting down on costs. So looking at your contracts, seeing where are you hemorrhaging money? Where are you sort of still in certain contractual liabilities that aren't serving you well, reevaluating that. Also looking at networking. So it's so key not to be an island, and especially in times of crisis, it's very important to look at what relationships can I form that will be for the benefit of my business or for the benefit of my profession. So it's great, you know, Eugene, to have networks such as yourself that are really sort of supportive of the African community and sort of getting individuals to engage with each other, because you find that there's much more power collectively than sort of individually, you know. And it's also trickling down to matters such as structure. So if, for example, you've got a business that normally focuses on something or on a particular product, you might then have to sort of restructure that, see what you can offer, or look at diversifying, or look at sort of stepping out of the box. And on a practical level, there's so many sort of, I know there's a furlough scheme, but there are also sort of business loans that are being offered to companies. There are opportunity to sort of seek help or information on what could work for a specific company. Legally, looking at speaking with lawyers. If you haven't had a lawyer, it's good to sort of engage one within a business context and literally sort of look at ways to protect ourselves. And building on from that, we know that all the news that outlets are saying that the whole COVID pandemic is sort of here to stay. And we're also hearing reports about the fact that there could be another wave on the way. So that then puts one in a forward-thinking mode, looking down 6 months down the line. What can you do to shore up your position? Or what can you do to sort of protect your business or your profession, especially for self-employed individuals? Looking at new clients, looking at putting yourself online, looking at webinars, just really sort of rethinking one's approach in terms of you know, how we work. And Zoom has truly sort of transformed the face of the traditional working model. You realize now that you don't necessarily always have to go, you know, to that meeting. You can meet virtually, and it can be as successful as meeting in person. I had a call recently from a company that are looking at a conference series, which ordinarily would have to be, you know, in person. But they've thought so well of setting up a conference which would be online, you know, and still offer as many benefits as a sort of in-person forum. So it's all about, one, being incredibly positive thinking, and that's not just rhetoric, it's really sort of deciding, what do I want to do in times of crisis? Do I want to be resilient and deal with it, or do I just want to sort of, you know, get into a fear mode? And then attitude, so being proactive about the specific steps that you can take relevant to your business or your profession, and then effecting those changes, so not procrastinating at all about things, stepping out, you know, planning what you need to do, doing it, being conscious of the fact that time isn't really ever promised to us, and also being conscious of the fact that we never know what the situation can be and how it could change from day to day, even with the various sort of global reports on matters. So that really would be a way to sort of encapsulate it all in terms of mindset and a proactive approach to things.
Thank you, Francis. I've seen a few questions coming in, but hopefully we can take them on at the end of the discussion. But of course, indeed, you are right, and the current crisis is an opportunity to look at the way we do things, and there's an opportunity for collaboration where it was possible, and to rekindle and build a new relationship. And you've mentioned, I don't know if you can hear me, you mentioned something about contracts. And I just want to get your view in terms of, we know during the crisis, quite a lot of contractual agreement or government laws and policies were kind of suspended. Mm-hmm. How does the impact and the certain conditions were not possible, especially if you have a contractual agreement to either deliver a service or deliver certain things, and it was not possible. Is this time possible to implement force majeure, or what has been the best way to address some of these things?
Well, thank you very much for that. In terms of some of the contractual difficulties that one encountered, in some cases you couldn't, you know, rely on force majeure because the COVID pandemic was not necessarily classified as that. And in other cases, you would have to sort of analyze whether, okay, in the case of a lockdown, does a lockdown qualify as a qualifying, you know, condition in terms of, you know, allowing, you know, a breach or allowing one to rely on certain other terms? So what we found is that it had certainly thrown up a lot of questions, especially in that sort of gray area where you can't sort of really rely on things, but yet you know very well that, well, the impact of the lockdown has had an impact on your business. So you find that there's been a lot of sort of legal wrangling about the interpretation of contracts, and also there will be possibly, you know, a number of litigation, you know, matters out of it. And another area, one of the sort of really sort of hard hit areas would also be the construction industry, where you have, you know, interpretations such as the subcontractors and liabilities for workers on ground and what have you. So it has thrown up really fascinating questions of law.
Oh, Thank you. Probably I'll come back to you. There's a few other more questions, but let me go to our next speaker, Temitope. And if you don't mind, Temitope, welcome, and probably also introduce yourself. Great to see you. And also share your perspective, how the situation has been on your side, and what has been the best practice you've been taking as a leader in terms of perspective, and how you kept your mindset, I hope, positive and taking the right steps to navigate the current situation.
Thank you so much for having me once again. My name is Temitope Olodo, and a little bit of history about me. Actually, I've worked in different sectors, but most of my work has been in public sector and in security. Started off in the Home Office, and as normal civil servants, what normally happen in civil services is that you move from one unit to another, one directorate to another. So managed to work as assistant director within the UK Border Agency, dealing with the crisis of immigration. So our sittings from a public perspective in terms of how public perceive an organization and the negativity that goes with it, and how to develop a proper counter narrative to address that. And then moving from there to the Olympics, where I worked as a consultant. And then my final work within the public sector was what we term the Office for Security and Counterterrorism, which really doesn't exist. But it's actually an organization within the system that deals with security challenges, particularly terrorism challenges. And we are always trying to react quickly to crisis. So this topic is actually quite timely, because all my life, for 25 years of working within the public sector and voluntary sector, there've always been one form of crisis or the other. Now, our definition of crisis will determine our mindset, our perception, and our behavior to it. If we see crisis as a challenge, a serious challenge, then we could do what some people would do 2,000, 4,000 years ago, as they said about David. They said they all broke down and started crying. Even men were crying, So men could cry, when crisis come. But after crying, I think what is important is that we must be able to sit up and focus and ask our question ourselves, the important question: how do we get through this crisis? Because storm will always come. There's always storm. And leaders in the leadership field, many of you who are here, are always used to crisis. Is that crisis in HR or crisis in the financial aspect of an organization? But crisis, big and small, always have the same pattern. It's a time in season that we need to take certain steps. And the step we take will determine whether we go down or we get lifted up. And I was quite happy with what Francis said about networking, because I believe that an antelope that jumps alone in the forest will definitely become the meat, for the predators, because working together in synergy is the best way in which to be able to deal with a crisis. And I believe that one of the things that we need to do in our community and as leaders is that in time of crisis, we need to look at building resilience, particularly in the area of networking, looking for individuals who are in our field and who we could share thoughts with and actually talk about how to move things forward. One of the things I was taught in government is that nobody is a monopoly of knowledge. And in civil service, when we develop policies, we go as far as Australia, even look at some things that is being done in Africa and localize it to our organization and to the public that we are dealing with, to ensure that we are providing information that is fit for purpose. So, and I know that a lot of my colleagues have talked about thinking outside the box, but I would like to talk about a different concept. I would like to talk about we building our own sandbox. I've got kids, and I know most of you have kids, and sometimes you really feel like pulling your hair off when you look behind your setting, and there's a lot of drawings that is going on behind the scene that you are unaware of, of kids creating their own sandbox. And one of the things we have done in our community is that we have allowed the system to cut short our mind, our thinking ability, our ability to navigate and think strategically on how to get out of crisis. And when you look at little kids, you see them playing. They have a little matches box when I was growing up, or they have a little bit of toys and they put them down. They say, "Daddy, join me. This is my Rolls Royce. This is my house." In their mind, they've created an empire. But sometimes you could say, remove all this rubbish. And in doing so, you are limiting their mind. One of the things I will say that if we can't take anything away from this meeting, I think one of the things we need to take away from this meeting and this engagement is we should allow ourselves to be free thinkers. Ability to think beyond our present level. Ability to think beyond our present level. You know, if a company is making 17,000 people in the world every day become a millionaire, and even during this COVID-19, like I said on my LinkedIn page, some people are making millions. We've heard of people that have decided to make hand sanitizers and put a bit of perfume in it so that they could, attract, different class of clients. Now, they will never have thought of that if coronavirus or this COVID-19 incident have not happened. So they've thought beyond outside the box. They've actually created their own sandbox. And I believe that when we're talking about crisis, one of the things that is important is gathering facts. What are the relevant facts in our industry? Not fake news, but relevant facts in our industry that could help us move forward. So for me, for example, because I work in the security sector, one of the things I was looking at is what are those products that are being produced in my sector that I could get the kind of, signatory rights to, that I'll be the only one that actually supply it, so that kind of product, I can get it out to my different clients who will need it, either in the workplace or in different places. One of the things I've been doing is writing articles targeting certain areas. So written an article and provided products to boardrooms to say, what are you doing post-COVID-19? There's going to be a lot of crisis out there, a lot of people unemployed, especially in Africa, who will be looking for opportunity to, maybe not kidnap the financial director, but kidnap the grandmother of the financial director so they could get money. So one of the things I created was what I called the SES training for boardroom, 30 minutes on the webinar, where I'll be able to explain to them the different kind of security challenges that will come in post-COVID-19 and how to deal with it. And I was asked by one HR director, he said, "Oh, why is this relevant?" I said, "Well, of course it is relevant, because if your financial director is kidnapped and that news is leaked out, that could affect your shares. But not only that, that individual is not thinking of anything more than getting his family member back. Competitors can actually arrange for people to be kidnapped in order for them to get competitive edge. So there are different ways in which risk comes, and we need to be able to manage risk. And one of the things we do very well in the civil service, and which some private organizations are also very good at, is having our business continuity plan in place. Our business continuity plan is more of a sky blue thinking. But most organizations, especially our organization, our community, BME community, are not quite good in putting in place business continuity plan. So if there's anything that we should take away from here, is drumming it out, or bringing out the drums to say, have a business continuity plan, have a risk audit in your organization, and ask that question: what will destroy my organization? What will stop me from working for the next 5 months or 6 months? Think of those kind of things and think of how we could do things better. Most organizations proud to post-COVID-19, if as an HR director you speak to them about bringing only 30% of the workforce into the organizations, they will feel you're talking rubbish, really. But today, we know that most of them are rethinking their strategy in terms of their people's strategy and what they need to do, whether some people need to work from home or not work from home. And most of us here on this platform have been organizing webinars and organizing events. Most of us are getting paid for speaking to boardrooms, explaining things to them from a security perspective, from a business perspective, from a financial perspective, especially in countries like Africa, where, of course, everything is not that equal, and it's not an easy environment. It's an hostile environment to certain kind of businesses, and people need to start thinking about how, as leaders, how to navigate and change the way they do things. I am of the view that leadership in crisis is the best time to test a leader's strength, a leader's ability to build on their skill set and bring people along with them. For many who are Christians, they will understand that even during the time of crisis, a leader must be calm. The Bible said that Jesus, when he was in the garden and he was going to be arrested, one of his disciples pulled out the sword and decided to cut off the ear of one of the soldiers. And Jesus said, no, you need to be calm. If I needed support, I will get legions of army that will come. My Father will send them. In other words, a leader must be calm in a time of crisis. And if there's any gift that a leader should take away, during the time of crisis, is the ability to think clear, an ability to be able to, to reflect on things around them, and change their perception about failure, change crisis to opportunity. We know that Formula One started producing oxygen boxes for UK government during this crisis. They moved away from their comfort zone, which is the Formula One, into a different zone. And one of the things that leaders have challenges in doing is being flexible. So if there's anything leaders should take away from here, is the ability to be flexible, ability to be able to think outside the box and actually create their own sandbox, change their perception and mindset, and bring people along to be able to add value. If they don't do that, their behavior, their body, their reaction can kill their business or build their business. So if a leader comes out and actually projects a defeating behavior, a defeating mindset, then that organization is doomed to fail. But if that organization comes up and says, you know what, we need to be more strategic, we need to look at other areas of business that we could go in, we need to now start brainstorming. And sometimes, good ideas can come from somebody with an helicopter view. And that's the reason why organizations need to go out there and bring people into the organization that will have that helicopter view, to look at the organization and say, you know what, I think this is an area of change. And let's not be dogmatic in our thinking during a crisis, but rather to be willing to listen and use different approaches. I use, because I'm a Christian, I tend to use ideas from the Bible. Don't forgive me. So there's a time Jesus will say, go and use pick money from the mouth of a fish or diamond and gold from the mouth of a fish. And there are times when he will pick the mud to put at in the eyes. Innovative. Everything he did was innovative. And a leader that will lead in a time of crisis must be a leader that is innovative. If a leader is not innovative, he will not be able to lead. And I think at that point, I will just say, just like one of my colleagues said earlier, one of the panelists, we need to think ahead. We need to be strategic. We need to be able to think in time of crisis and change our mindset. And just like Sister Frances said, we need to be able, to network in order to be able to excel in time of crisis. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Temitope, for that insightful discussion. Of course, I've learned quite a lot, and picking some of your words like an antelope jumping around, of course, become a meat of a predator, which was quite, and also we need to allow ourselves to be free thinkers. So quite a few things you highlighted, of course, in terms of the business continuity. People need to be more strategic. Crisis, of course, we've seen throughout the last 3-4 months that the crisis has been a test for leaders' ability. Some of the leaders we thought are leaders has actually disappeared, or they were nowhere to be seen. And we saw new leaders emerging from the crisis who had the right attitude, the right mindset to respond in time. And of course, as you mentioned, flexibility has been key, because situation has been changing on every minute. And it's not easy to work in a crisis mode. So it has not been a very, and of course, hopefully when I'm going to Africa, I'll come to get some survival tips, security tips.
Definitely.
Yeah. So without taking too much time, let me go to our next speaker, Dr. Winston. Dr. Winston, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Well, welcome, and thank you for joining us, and I hope you've been listening to some of the discussion and the comment from our speaker. So I would like also to invite you to introduce yourself and also share how the situation has affected you in the current situation, and your thought in terms of leadership in crisis. How can we adopt better mindset and the behavior to be able to be stronger and navigate the current situation, and of course look to the positive side and ahead.
Okay, so thank you very much for having me, and I have been listening to the other speakers, so I could say that there's not much left for me to say, but I will say something. I've been watching a bit of football, and I noticed that they have the sound going on the background in the television, so you can actually hear what seems to be live audience comments or sounds. So one of the things about Zoom is that you don't know how people are reacting. So hopefully you will accept what I'm saying, and that it will go down well, but I won't have any way of knowing. So my experience and my upbringing has been, first of all, I grew up in the Caribbean in Jamaica, and then I came to the UK to live. So in Jamaica, I was an army officer. I was a commanding officer of an infantry battalion. I have some things in common with Temitope in terms of leaving the military and then becoming a civil servant. In Jamaica, I dealt quite a bit with different crises, floods, civil disturbances, hurricanes. The good thing about hurricanes is that you have about 10 days warning that they're coming. So it doesn't matter, they still have a very bad effect, but you do know that they're coming. Other crises are very sudden. So earthquakes, for example, in Jamaica, they would shake every now and then, but you don't know when they're going to happen. So they're quite different crises. In the UK, I've been involved in foot and mouth back in 2001. I was in Cumbria with Brigadier Alex Burt-Whistle doing the foot and mouth. I've also done some work in Africa, in Kenya after the 2010. I was there in 2010 helping with the legal side of responding to the breakdown in the constitutional arrangements, and I worked with the permanent secretaries in Kenya to help reshape their response to the new law. And then in Kano in Nigeria, I actually did some work out there with DFID in response to that. On a regular basis, I write a one-page article on LinkedIn each week. This week I'm talking about schools. I've been learning from my children and my wider family about what's happening in the school community, so I have something to say about that. This is my second time I'm mentioning schools. So I'm going to go into what I have to say now, having given you that brief background to myself. I hope you're all hearing me well.
Yes, we can hear you.
Fantastic. All right, so responding to the COVID and future challenges. So I'm going to tweak what I had to say a little bit, because Temitope has touched on some of that, but I still have a few things to say. So we were caught unprepared. It's not that we didn't know that we could have pandemics or outbreaks like this, but we were totally caught unprepared and we were caught flat-footed. And it took us some time to make sense of it. That took quite a while to figure out what we need to do and who will do what. And I suppose what I would take away from that is that as leaders, and part of our role is to make sure that we are always prepared, and Temitope talked a little bit about that. We can always prepare. There's a pre-crisis phase that we can work with, and then there's a during the crisis phase, and then there's after the crisis phase. I just want to talk about some tools for preparing for future crises, as other people have gone through some of the other issues. The tools which I want to talk about are the tools which will help us to build resilient organizations. This is the role of leaders, to make the organization able to withstand the shocks, the short-term shocks, and to be able to come out on the other end quite well. We have noticed that many organizations, this is a first world country, and then we can notice the impact of COVID on so many first world countries, on so many world-class organizations. They have just been overwhelmed. We've seen the impact on the NHS. We've seen the impact on so many parts of our infrastructure, unable to cope with COVID. So how do we actually build that resilience so that we can actually respond more effectively with future crises? I think part of the thinking is that, what is our mindset? Our mindset has to be one in which we actually make ourselves redundant in a crisis. So people do not need us when things are going well. They need us in a crisis, but we can actually prepare to make sure that if we are not around, if we are not available, people who work to us do actually know what to do. If they have to be looking to us for everything to do in a crisis, then we're never going to get through. And I think that there has been some amount of that happening in this current crisis. One of the tools which we use extensively in the military, and I know other organizations do that, is the scenario. I recommend it to everybody that I work with, whether in my role as a private consultant or whether it's still in the civil service. The scenario helps you to think the unthinkable. Temitope talked a little bit about it. Think, what is it that could happen to stop the organization from being able to do what it is supposed to do? And it's not about being fatalistic, or it's not about doom and gloom. It's actually, when you have thought through that, it helps you to say, well, so what? What would we do if this happened? And when you have built your scenarios, and this is something which I help people with all the time, you then go from building your scenarios to extrapolate from the scenarios, and you put standard operating procedures in place. So for example, with COVID, if we had done a scenario which said, what would we do in a pandemic? What would a pandemic look like? We would have built scenarios for the NHS. We would have built scenarios for burying people. We would have built scenarios or SOPs for social distancing. We would have had all those things in place. As it is, we didn't have those in place, so we've had to make them up on the go. Now, it doesn't matter how much you do scenarios, you'll never be able to create all the standard operating procedures that are needed, but it would go away. I remember being in the Caribbean for a hurricane, for example. We had standard operating procedures for every phase of the hurricane, and that served us well. And that meant that if a commanding officer or if a company commander or some commanding level was not able to react after the scenario, then other people knew what to do because it's written down. And sometimes even with writing the scenario, things happen. So I remember once in Jamaica, we had a jailbreak, and there were about 150 prisoners from one of the maximum security prisons on the loose. Now, in the standard operating procedure, it says, do not go outside during the hurricane. But as the commanding officer during the hurricane, I had to get a company of soldiers to go out, put their lives at risk, and go and respond to the jailbreak and to round up the prisoners. So even when you have the scenarios, you would think, well, would you have thought of that? You probably wouldn't have. But the fact that soldiers were available to respond was the important thing. So I've mentioned the scenarios, I've mentioned the standard operating procedures. Then there's the whole business of a crisis management team. What that means is you have this team of people who are ready to lead in the crisis. It's not just yourself, but it could be your senior leadership team, but you also put in place a trigger. So if something happens, so for example, when we heard the first notices of this COVID, somebody could have said each leadership team needs to go into crisis mode, and we will start meeting on a daily basis to decide what do we know, what don't we know, what do we need to know, and so forth. Ask those questions. Because one of the functions of the senior leadership team is to get the facts. What is it that's going on? Make sense of it, and then distill that and help other people to react. Making decisions without 100% of the information. So you're constantly looking at the trends and the trajectories and so forth and making decisions based on that. The other thing I would say is that rehearsals. Now, you can't rehearse every infinite detail, but I know, for example, most organizations now put in place fire drills. That's a rehearsal, and they rehearse it. Or at least they go outside and they stand around. But it's a similar thing, whether it's a fire or an earthquake or any other crisis, you can put in place a certain number of rehearsals. In the army, we actually rehearsed going to war. So it's not just about going out and doing the practice, but we actually did live firing exercises to ensure that soldiers knew what it was for a bullet to be passed in close to them, what it is to kill somebody, how do you react when somebody gets killed. So you go through those rehearsals so that if the real thing happens, people are not thinking, well, what is this? I have no idea what is going on, but they do have some level of preparation for that. The other thing I would say about making the organization resilient is having your logs and your sit-reps. A log is really a record of every incident that takes place. Now that is straight textbook Army, and it has served me well during COVID as well. You write down everything that is happening. It doesn't matter if you have a formal log, you keep a notebook and you keep a record. And on a 24-hour basis, you would do a roundup of your 24-hour activities, and it's called a situation report. Why is that important? Because when you are in a crisis, you make decisions. I have had to go into a court of law and defend my decisions, which I have made in a crisis. It was a civil disturbance. And it was the log which I kept. I was able to say, Your Honor, the judge, I said, may I refer to my notes? And he said, may I see the notes? And he took my notes and he looked at it. What he was looking for was not the detail of it. He was looking for the consistency. Was this something that I was doing on a regular basis? And when he had looked at it for 5 minutes, he gave it back to me and he said, yes. And I was able to make my presentation to the court of law based on my notes, because you can't remember everything. So those are some of the tools which I have used in my own experience of responding to a crisis and in a leadership role. The scenario, the SOPs, the logs, the sit-reps, the crisis management team, and the triggers that you put in place. I think there's also one other thing that I would say is that as leaders, you can't know everything. And one of the skills that I would say we have to do, which is counterintuitive to quite a bit of our cultures, is that we do not like asking questions. In many cultures, if you ask questions, people think that there's something wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with asking a question. There's nothing wrong with asking for people who have better ideas or who might have seen this before. For you, it might be for you it might be deja vu, but for other people it might be vujade, or whichever iteration you want to take it in. So it's good to ask other people around you, what do you think, or what do you think is happening? Have you seen this before? And then to use that to go forward. And then there's a whole business of setting the example. In a crisis, you can't be an armchair general. You have to be out there and you have to make yourself seen. You have to be seen, and people have to hear you. You have to go around and you have to talk to people, comfort them, console them, advise them, ask them how they're doing, and so forth. You actually have to really, really put yourself out more than normal. So that's pretty much the points I wanted to cover. I think other people have covered other things that should be said. So I don't know if there are any questions, but I'm going to stop at that point, and hopefully you found it useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Winston. Of course, we found some of the key things you have highlighted very useful, and we've seen some of those kind of practice. For example, from my side, working with some of my clients through consulting, I've seen quite a lot of leaders setting up crisis team, responding and providing daily communication, because most of us, we know that there was daily briefing and sometimes things were changing minute by minute. So it was very important to provide daily update and also daily catch up before you kick off the day, to know just in case maybe the law has changed or the government has suspended everything. So it was important. And of course, communication was key. Continuous informing your people what's the situation, what are the steps, what are the companies is thinking, what are the next steps, and so that keep them informed. And of course, at some point, I know quite a lot of companies stopped, kind of suspended their operation strategy to focus on people as a priority, because at some point, people are not, especially those who have been affected, those who are a bit worried about their health, their well-being, they were not focusing on implementing company activity. They are not more focused on their well-being, on their safety. Am I going to work and catch COVID-19 or so it was also time for reassurance and things like that. And of course, scenario planning has been one of the key tools for most of the business, because with too many unknowns, it's difficult to have one plan. There is always a advisable that you have various alternatives for consideration with the current situation. And moving forward, we still have unknowns, and Brexit is still in the pipeline. But one question I think was, you mentioned that we were not, a lot of companies were not prepared, but quite a lot of discussion comes out to indicate that already as part of Brexit, we were already quite a lot of government, or there was some preparation already in place for Brexit that became useful to the UK. Or was that not the case? What was your view on that?
Oh yes, a lot of what we have in place was useful, but in terms of the general public and the general infrastructure and the way we process information and the way we made sense of it, it took us far too long to get to a point. We weren't crisis ready. We weren't COVID ready. For years, we've known that a pandemic is a possibility. But when the pandemic came, we were like caught in the headlights. And I guess, I don't know whether it had anything to do with Christmas and the New Year and we weren't focused or what, but it took us until way down into February to really say this is serious. And I think we also made one of these, I think as a general comment, we started off on one strategy and then we changed that strategy and then changed direction. That probably in hindsight was the right decision, but it probably cost us at some point. So I don't know how much it cost us, but I think we took too long to get a handle on what the crisis is, to name it and to understand it, and then to be able to respond effectively to it. Now, that will happen in many, many crises. COVID actually is a SARS virus, but it's a novel virus, so it was not the same as the last one. And that might have been one of the elementary mistakes we made in thinking that the next SARS virus would be similar to the same one. I'm not a scientist, so I don't know what the thinking is there. But because it is a SARS virus, we might have been thinking that the behavior would be the same, or the way it manifests itself would be the same. In this case, it wasn't. So and of course, these crises are extremely complex, and the complexity manifested itself more than anything in COVID. So there's no simple answer to it, but I think we could have done a lot better in generally preparing, even for example, basic stocks of PPE. That is blindingly obvious that if you're going to have a SARS epidemic, you should have those stocks in place. So there are some things that you can actually get right, and some things you have to work through, and it will take you a little bit more time. The NHS has done really, really well, but I'm sure there are lots of lessons that they will learn about how they will approach the next iteration of whatever comes next. We hear there's talk of a bubonic plague manifesting itself, so I hope we are keeping our eye on that. Yes, but so we did have some basics in place, but we didn't quite, we took too long to respond.
Yeah. No, you are right about some the data coming from the market indicator. I think early days, a lot of companies were in denial. They kept saying it's a Chinese issue, it's a Chinese pandemic, it's not coming to the Europe. But one question we have here is... Sorry,
can I just say something before I say that?
Yes.
You just mentioned some of the things that people said. And one of the very, very bad things which happened in COVID is that people said that Black people cannot get COVID. That was just so unfortunate, and it has cost many lives. Now, I don't know where it started or how it became part of the narrative, but that was destructive for the Black community. And I'm speaking to a Black community here. And I don't think it was deliberate, but because it came out, there were people who were less than careful in how they responded, and it might have cost us lives.
Yeah. Thank you for pointing out. Actually, it takes us to the next question, and probably I would like to hear from the rest of the panelists. As part of the crisis, of course, we've seen another crisis of Black Lives Matters, which is questioning inclusiveness in leadership and all those. Do you think the current crisis, the COVID crisis, did encourage or is likely to prompt a question for business to think to be more inclusive? Because we know inclusive leadership, of course, encourage more innovation, creativities, and better experience and things like that. Has the current crisis encouraged inclusion and diversity? Is it likely to enhance more collaboration within organization? What's your thoughts? I don't know who wants to start. And I know the Black Lives Matters at the moment is a hot topic and it's not going away soon. So
let me just say something. It might sound a bit controversial, but I believe that the issue of the Black Lives Matters is a matter that we in our community need to take very seriously. After we've brought down all the statues, if we don't defeat the mind, if we don't deal with the psychological aspect of it, we will still have problems. We will still have challenges, because at least I've walked around in government and I've seen things, and I've seen the way cultures and different communities work. And the challenge we have in our community is that we've never come together as one. And that's the reason why I'm so happy about this One Africa and One Caribbean, this one people strategy, because we need to start thinking about our people and how to change their mindset. There's not much difference between the slave in the house and the slave in the field. Both of them are slaves. But one thing, they are better than the other. And once some people get a bit of bounce back low, the first mindset is to go and get a fine or a nice BMW. You know, that mindset needs to be changed, you know, and they need a lot of people on this platform to help them, because the first thing they do is the money they get is not to build, it's just to consume. And we need to change that mindset. We also need to change a mindset where, you know, the narrative is that if it's a black man that is giving that advice, we should get it for next to nothing, you know, and we don't value what we have. So if Black life must matter, it must start from within. And it's not just about bringing down monuments. It's about changing the mindset itself to let our children know that we need to move away from a life of entitlement and start adding value. Let's move away from, let's start creating jobs within our community. Let the money circulate within our community. In fact, if a person said he's selling it for £5, give him £7 to honor him and value him, knowing full well that that money is still going to spend within the community. And I think if we could develop packages of training that could help youth, if we could start bringing in those cultural things that we have, you know, that community togetherness that we have, and start building on it and bringing that narrative out. Be your brother's keeper. You know, if there is a child in the community in those days that have a challenge, they look for the strongest man in the community for that child to go and stay with, and that person will mentor that child to bring that person back, you know, to the proper path. Nowadays, we are not interested in that. Everybody's running their own race. It's about how many of our children are in Cambridge, how many of them are going to Oxford, it's my child, and then publicizing it on Facebook. Oh, yes, I just bought a new car, or I just bought a new house. It needs to go beyond that. And for me, if we really want to change and, you know, be a leader in our community, you know, make Black Lives Matter, we need to start teaching our people about how to come together. Because if we don't come together, 200 years time, we're still going to be talking about the same thing. So that's my personal view on that.
I'd like to add.
Thank you so much. And Morenike, who want to go first?
I was.
I know, Francis, you are itchy, and yesterday I know we talked about the BME discussion.
Exactly.
Can I go ahead? Is that okay? Can
okay.
I go? Can I add? I just wanted to build on to what Temitope said just now.
Yes.
And he's highlighted the right thing. Earlier on, when I mentioned, I did say mindset is in two forms. It's the mind, and set. So it's the state of the mind. Now, a mindset triggers a behavior. And like just building on what Temitope has said is, I am in the career space, and I personally don't feel that people put themselves forward enough. So when people get to managerial grades, they tend to be very comfortable. And I think people need to break it and just put themselves forward. I know that, the Black Lives Matter has raised a lot of awareness, and there are some organizations wanting to put things in place, but people are not going forward. It's as simple as having a conference at work. You'll just look at the demographics of those that actually attend those conferences or go to these professional network. And then when there are roles in directorship or senior roles, because when we get to those roles, there's an influence you can have on that environment, and there's an impact you can make, even for the youth. So I work with a lot of senior executives like myself, and in our different workplaces, we have created opportunities for young graduates to come during summer for work experience. When they come, not only do they see a role model, they get that enthusiasm that they want to really go all the way, work, if they choose to have a career. But if we don't have people in those key positions, number one, not just getting into a key position, but having a mindset that you're willing to help others and you're willing to be approachable and accessible. So some people in the Black community have got to those positions, but they're not accessible and they're not pulling others up either. But when you're there, it's about thinking that this is a place that I can help, not just the Black, because I believe in equality. So I'm not just going to say, because I'm a finance director overseeing a 6 billion pension fund, that I'm just going to look for Black people, but it's just giving everybody an equal opportunity, and people need to put themselves forward. Now, there's another flip side. In as much as we want to help people, people need to understand the etiquettes, how they need to perform, how they need to interact with that society. So they, like Tokwe said, there's a lot of training that needs to be done, but people need to put themselves forward. They need to be passionate about it. And we need to take responsibility for this. Nobody else is going to do it. We need to own it, run with it, and make it happen. There's a lot of talks, but practical things out there. I mean, I've been running my social enterprise for 5 years. If I approach a fellow, I've approached so many Black people to support me. The collaboration, when you talk about collaboration in the community, it's totally different. What people are wanting is totally different. If I approach in the Black community, there's so much money. It's unbelievable, but you can't get a dime. But if there's a social event, possibly you might. It's a priority, it's different, it's completely different. And that's where I said the mindset, if we have a mindset that we want a change for our youth, for the next generation, we don't want them to go through this, then our behaviors would depict that. And so that's what I just wanted to add, so I can give others an opportunity to add to that. Thank you.
Francis, what's your thought?
Thanks, Eugene. I think you do see a change in terms of mindset on the community level. So, for example, there's a new shop that's open in Tottenham, which is a Black-owned, Black-owned food grocery store that is sort of changing the narrative. You do see that this pandemic and also the whole sort of Black Lives Matter movement has certainly made members of our community start to think inward and start to see, we've got to support each other. We've got to buy Black or buy, African or support each other at the very basic level. And it starts from there. Of course, you then build up into the workplace and making sure that when you meet others who are other professionals, that there's an inclination to bond and work with each other, as opposed to other scenarios where literally each one sort of thing, stands on their own or is operating on their own sort of, initiative. So everything starts from the sort of ground level, in my opinion. And certainly, in my opinion, you do see the change. And with everything, it's always a process. You can't have change overnight. However, you can see the right steps, towards attaining those goals start to happen.
I think if I stay on you, I think there's two questions to you. One is about how do you stay positive and sustain positive mindset with all the negativities in the media today? And then the second question is, in your experience, what would you say businesses has been doing very well, and what would you say we need to do better? Francis, I think these are questions addressed to you.
Okay. Okay, thanks for that. So in terms of what one can do to stay positive, especially when we're bombarded with negativity on a daily basis, I would advise it's really important to look at measures or things that can give you some sense of well-being and joy, and that varies with each individual. With some, it would be issues of faith, making sure that, enhancing one's faith, being in a community of similar faith needs. It would also be for others sort of, taking up a sport, exercising, either if it's golf or, whatever, football, whatever it is, something that you can do to keep your mind and your health centered. because it's very easy to just absorb negativity and just keep taking that on. And ultimately, you might find that that then impacts severely on the person in their ability to even lead or their ability to even engage with others, which then can also have a knockdown effect in terms of one's immunity. And then you find, you know, people being susceptible to illnesses. So for me, well-being is such an important aspect to this, and taking steps to do what works for you as a priority is very important. And the second question was, what are businesses doing very well, and what would you say they need to do better? Well, I think in terms of businesses adapting to the relevant measures. So whether it's for those that are allowed to open, putting the relevant sort of protective measures in place. For those that are working online, it's great to see how versatile, you know, Zoom has been for a lot of companies, a lot of businesses and clients that I deal with have all adapted to Zoom. I think also seeing where certain companies have been very good in terms of how they've handled their employee relationships, how they've looked after their staff. Again, very key. Embracing technology is really a core aspect of this, because you find that one thing that has excelled is the digital space. So embracing technology and being innovative on that is also something that you see that companies have done very well. And ultimately, I think there's always room for improvement in anything. But it's all about recognizing steps that are taking, having companies always looking, as Dr. Winston mentioned, you know, having teams or committees or whatever, or individuals in place that are always sort of assessing matters and seeing where can we improve on things. It's always key to sort of evaluate one's efforts, and that sort of keeps one on a sort of progressive foot. So that would be a sort of summary of my position on that.
I think if I go to Dr. Winston, what's your thought on Black Lives Matters? And of course, there was a question earlier from one of the delegates who registered. Black Lives Matters at the moment, it's losing momentum. And there's been quite a lot of indication that there's a lot of negative forces trying to dilute the objective, trying to direct it the negative, that this is a violent thing, and also our people are not helping themselves. They are also defeating the cause by not focusing on the right thing. How do you see the Black Matters can help to make the right impact and change? What will be the best way people approach it before we lose the momentum and dilute the whole opportunity?
I think as unfortunate as it is, George Floyd's death has given us an amazing opportunity. And Gianna Floyd said it best: "My daddy changed the world." And there's this picture of her on I think it's his friend's shoulders, saying, "My daddy changed the world." And yes, it can create the opportunity for change in the world. But if you recall, in the late 90s and the early 2000s, we had a movement for diversity. And that actually became a bad word, because white people saw us as a group of people who were anti-white. It became almost a very negative thing in itself to talk about diversity. I think we have to be very clear that we are not anti-white. We have nothing against white people. All we are asking for is to be treated equally and fairly. But if we position Black Lives Matter as something which is only for Black people, then the negative forces will hijack it. We have to explain, and as leaders, and there are all leaders in this space, we have to help to create the narrative that this is something that we have to do together with white people and any other shade that you may be, whether you are Chinese or you're Indian or whatever. This is not something about just Black people. Otherwise, we just become as racist as everybody else. And if we are perceived as just being as racist and as just being as violent and as just being as destructive as everything that has gone before, then of course it will lose its energy. So the challenge for us is, how do we shape the Black Lives Matter agenda as an inclusive agenda where we want our white counterparts or other counterparts to understand it. My great-great-grandparents were slaves, and I still struggle with shaking off the mindset of slavery. It might seem odd, but I didn't realize that I was actually white until I went to Africa. I have no idea of how to function in Africa. None whatsoever. Everything that I know is from a white construct. And that might seem really odd to people, but everything that I know, I am a Black man with a white head. Everything, and it might sound very strange to say that, but I actually, all of my mindset is from the white world, the Western white world. I do not relate to Africa, except in a very, it's a wonderful place to go, and I would love to go and live there and all that sort of thing. But I actually don't have the understanding of Africa as Africans do. And I got a shock of my life when I went to work there, and I've worked there extensively. So I think there's a big opportunity, but we have to shape it, we have to nurture it, we have to encourage the conversations of inclusivity. And the big mistake we must not make is to be racist ourselves. And I have actually heard and have had to intervene with Black people who are sounding like racist. And I'm saying, well, what do you expect to happen? So we have to be careful. I know there are people who will try to hijack every agenda. Every single agenda that you can come up there will be attempts to hijack it by people who have their own perverse reasons. So it is something that we have to protect, and we have to nurture, and we have to become ambassadors so that we get the best of it, and we get the support of our white colleagues and other colleagues to be able to take it forward. We can't do this ourselves.
Yeah. Thank you. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, but if you don't mind 2-3 minutes. The last question was, normally we see the Black executive who excel or become successful, they becomes inaccessible. How can you encourage Black leaders and executives to become accessible and also support or mentor, trying to bring people, like I think Morenike mentioned it a bit, and how can you encourage a Black or African executive or leader who have made it also to create way and mentor and encourage others to help them, to inspire them?
Well, Eugene, if I may mention here what I do with some of the young lawyers that are coming through the ranks, is certainly to reach out and mentor them and just offer myself to them in terms of advice, direction, guidance, or whatever they need. Because I know that when we are in this position and when we are able to sort of offer, you know, a hand to the young ones coming through the ranks, there's so much that one can do in terms of transforming, you know, mindsets that they might have, or empowering them, because you find that with the young generation, there's so many proactive young, you know, energetic minds out there with a very strong community, you know, focus. So I certainly endeavored to do that. There's a young lawyer that I noticed in one of the barristers' chambers. Ordinarily, it's really hard to get pupillage in some of these chambers, especially if you're a person of color. So it was so good to see this young Nigerian girl who had an opportunity, and I reached out to her and said, you know, I was a pupil at that chambers. I would love to support you. I'm here, whatever you need. And she immediately reached out. Now we've set up a mentor relationship. And so social impact, mentoring, all of that is so key. And being open, you know, just being accessible through LinkedIn is one of the best places in which individuals can sort of reach out. And certainly through networks such as yourself, where we can just sort of be able to speak to the younger generation on various matters would be immensely helpful.
Thank you, Francis. What's the rest think? Quickly, 1 minute, 2 minutes, what's your thoughts? How can we encourage?
I would say is it's both ways. You know, you can reach out to someone but they also need to reach out because it's both ways. But for leaders, I think like Francis said, you know, if it's somebody you don't know, LinkedIn is always there. There's different social media platforms that you can use to reach out. People are not more accessible. Now, if they don't respond, I am of the notion of being persistent. And sometimes they're not just responding because they choose. It might be that they just have a lot of demands. And that might be just keep on pressing the buttons and don't give up.
Winston and Temitope, what's your thought? How can we encourage more Black and African leaders?
I think we just keep on pressing the button and you don't stop. Just exactly what I will say. But I think more importantly, just like has been highlighted also, I think LinkedIn has been a very good, it's been a blessing because we've been able to connect with a lot of people that naturally you will not connect with. Even though I've got a Facebook page, I hardly go there. Because most of the time, the people on there are begging for money, money from Africa. But LinkedIn is much better. You have people that actually are serious about their career, and and sometimes it's just a word. The fact that I spent few years on this planet, I know exactly the button that you need to push in order to get into where you need to get to, and sowing that seed. You know, there's nothing as rewarding as knowing that you've added value to somebody just through that one talk. So I think I will encourage that we'll speak to a lot of our colleagues to help a lot of our young ones coming up on LinkedIn. If you see their profile and they are good and you think they should get, they will need a bit of mentoring and coaching, then offer it even if they've not asked. Or send them a message. I've done that and say, oh, I like what you're doing. I think you could do better with this, that. And you find that most of them are so happy that you've actually given them a good feedback on what they could do, not publicly, but behind the scene. And I think that's one of the things that we need to do in our community. We tend to want to talk to people in the public, and people don't like disrespect. They like to be valued. So valuing people, even when you're adding value, is the best way forward.
Your last word, Winston. What's your last word?
So 2 quick points. I was asked to do a presentation to a Zoom meeting of a group of colleagues recently. And when it was starting time, I agreed to do it because once I'm asked to do a speaking engagement, I pretty much would say yes unless there's a clash. And when it was starting time, there were only 3 persons on the call. And the host said, do you want to cancel? I said, no, the people who are here are the people who are here. And they have bothered to turn up. So I bothered to do the presentation to them. The other thing I do before COVID is that there's a fairly broad BME community where I work. And from time to time, people will pop into my office and they say, can I have a word? And whatever I'm doing, I say, can I just finish the sentence if I'm on my laptop or something? And I pull my chair around, I go to the front of the desk. I never talk to people from behind my desk. And I sit down and I say, how can I help you? And then we have a chat. Sometimes it's a quick chat, sometimes it's not such a quick chat. But if you say you are accessible, you must be accessible. It's no good saying I'm busy because they will not come back.
On that note, there's been quite a lot of things that have been talked about, quite a lot of insightful recommendations, practical key takeaway. I hope people who have been listening to the discussion have been encouraged by what has been shared by our speakers and so many things. I hope you find it very insightful and very informative. And without taking more time, I just took extra 6 minutes. So I'm not taking any more, but thank you so much. It's been wonderful having you, and we hope to have you again to come and share more about your life and the experience and continue support our One Africa initiative and to help achieve our objective. And we look forward to having you, and thank you so much and have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Bye.